You're listening to Red Pill 78. I am the Corruption Detector, and this is your Red Pill News. I want to start off the show today with a little musical interlude courtesy of our friend Methods. Let's just go ahead and take a listen and we'll get right into it.
Somewhere in the great beyond, where the warriors go, there are two admirals of the United States meeting their much-loved son. They are telling him he is the greatest among them.
Oh, spectacular footage of Attorney General William Barr playing the bagpipes yesterday, and if you'll notice, U.S. Attorney John Huber was sitting on the stage with them. I thought that was pretty interesting that they chose to have U.S. Attorney John Huber on the stage among all of the U.S. attorneys in the United States, and there was only a couple of people on that stage. Very, very cool. Well, we've got a show just packed full of news for you today. We've got a couple of updates from some previous stories. We've got a bit of a touch on the Democratic debate from last night. Wasn't much of a debate, if you ask me. Also, some newly released documentation that Sean Hannity was touching on several days ago. Looks like the Donald on Reddit may be on its last leg. And also collusion between the New York Times and the intelligence agencies of the United States of America. So sit back, relax, and we'll be right back after a quick word from my sponsor. Hey friends, I want to share something really special with you today from my sponsor Noble Gold, because without their help, I would not be able to make this content for you. Do you remember that moment you became aware of just how much you didn't know? I certainly remember mine, and once your eyes are open, it's impossible to keep them closed any longer. Noble Gold has created something remarkable to remember that moment, so I want to introduce you to the Q coin. A year of painstaking detail went into making this, not just because of the phenomenal design, not just because of the incredible symbolism on the coin, not just because of the sense of belonging it instills, but because it's a big secret hidden in plain sight. If you take a look at the coin, it's loaded with Q quotes, a lightning bolt, 17 references, and so much more. And take a look at the packaging that this coin comes in. It's truly a work of art. Whether you're new to the movement or you've been following for some time, you're going to want to add this to your collection. You can get yours today by going to www.greatawakeningcoin.com. And for this month, you can get a $5 discount if you buy 2 coins. Just use my name, RedPill78, in the discount box, and you'll get these 2 coins delivered to your doorstep. They're simply amazing. The choice will be yours. And breaking news, we have fresh drops from our favorite Anon. 3 drops have come since the time that I started this video just earlier today. The first taking place at 4:23 p.m. The time now is 5:10 p.m. Then we had one at 4:28, and then another recently at 4:34. So let's check these out. The first, be ready. Then we have some, perhaps a device check, future comms, pre-stage, ELE, SEC, DIR, CAP, on ready. And then, most recently, For God and Country, Patriots Fight. And all from my friend and fellow researcher Methods. He said, and Anon figured out something awesome. future comms right here from May 2018 on the 4th. Then we had the Freedom Flag on the 10th of May in 2018, and then another Freedom Flag on the 20th of May 2018. That's 4/10/20. And then right here, For God and Country, Freedom. This is where it ties in. So this post today is calling back to these posts here, and we also get the initials DJT, Donald J. Trump. Is our POTUS speaking to us yet again on the most awesomest message board on the face of the earth? I think that very well may be a possibility. So it's too bad I have to get this video put out for you guys today, but Hopefully tomorrow it means there's going to be some other stuff. I'd also like to point out today is the 31 days. So that means we had 30 days without a post. So exactly 30. Just something to think about. All right, guys, on to the next. All right, we've got yet another suicide from the NYPD. Another cop has killed himself. The fourth officer suicide just this month. And an off-duty NYPD cop died in an apparent suicide at his Long Island home. The fourth city cop to take his own life this month, law enforcement sources told the Post on Thursday. The Bronx cop, identified by sources as 53-year-old Kevin Priest, was found dead at his Hicksville home in Nassau County with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head at around 9:50 p.m. Wednesday, police said. Priest, who was married with children, was pronounced dead at the scene, sources say. He was just 3 days away from his 25th anniversary on the job, and the death marks, of course, the 4th NYPD suicide in June and the 6th department suicide this year. If you'll remember, on June 14th, Officer Mike Caddy, 29, was found inside a vehicle on Wilcox Street behind the 121st Precinct station house with a self-inflicted GSW. Caddy, a domestic violence officer, had 7 years on the job. Now, also on June 6th, the veteran homicide detective Joe Calabrese of 58 was found in Brooklyn's Plum Beach, also the victim of another self-inflicted GSW. The day before, Stephen Silks, the revered deputy chief of Queens North, shot himself in the head in an unmarked patrol car. He was rushed to Elmhurst Hospital but could not be saved. And of course, they mentioned that NYPD offers mental health services to officers who might be suffering some various psychological issues from working on the job. But the only thing that I can think about is that the Anthony Weiner laptop went through the NYPD, and now it could be people who had something to do with it. People who saw the contents of that laptop are now coming up deceased, and they all seem to be committing suicide. Are they being blackmailed? Are they being forced to commit suicide so that they can protect their children and wives? Or are they being suicided? Hopefully we don't see any more of these deaths, but this is definitely something to keep your eye on. Now, also, if you'll remember, recently Angela Merkel was caught having severe shaking as she was standing with the new Ukrainian president. And the Gateway Pundit asks, what is wrong with Merkel? The German chancellor was seen violently shaking again, this time for 2 minutes. German Chancellor Angela Merkel was seen violently shaking on Thursday. She met with Frank-Walter Steinmeier on Thursday when she began to uncontrollably shake. The tremors lasted for 2 minutes. About a week ago, Merkel was seen shaking as she stood next to the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, and the alarming incident was apparently not the first that Merkel, 65, was seen violently shaking in similar circumstances, according to a report from DPA news agency. Merkel claimed she was just dehydrated and felt better after she drank some water. Concern for Merkel's health is now growing after she was seen again shaking and clutching her arms. Germany keeps health problems and medical conditions of politicians secret, so it's unclear what Merkel is currently suffering from. And I'd just like to say, before I show you this next video showing Angela Merkel clearly having some health issues, someone had said to me in the comments section that I was making fun of old people. No, that's not at all what I'm doing. I'm simply showing that Angela Merkel may not be fit for the office that she holds due to some undiagnosed or unreleased health ailment. Or perhaps it's just her nerves because she's afraid of what's coming next. Let's go ahead and take a look.
Konfliktgeprägten Welt das Versprechen von Frieden, Sicherheit und Wohlstand tatsächlich erfüllt. In ihren verschiedenen Ämtern haben sie mit großem Nachdruck dafür gearbeitet, die Kluft zwischen Politik und Bürgern, zwischen Regieren und Regierten nicht größer werden zu lassen. Sie haben immer wieder betont, dass wir verständliche Sprache brauchen, aber auch Durchlässigkeit.
Not much here for the audio, so I'm just going to run commentary. It's clear that something is wrong with Angela Merkel. This is not, too fantastic an idea to consider. Look at the way that she's shaking. She's having a lot of trouble standing. She clutches her arms together in order to kind of support herself. And look, now she's taking a glass of water, but she still looks to be having some problems. Also keep in mind that this video has been reversed to get around any potential copyright violations. So what is wrong with Angela Merkel? I've had people suggest diabetes. I've had people suggest Parkinson's disease. If you are a medical professional and you have seen these videos of Angela Merkel shaking and you have some input, I would really appreciate you sending me a message, either in the comment section or more likely my email, because it's a lot easier to reach me there, although it is still difficult at times. My only concern here is that Angela Merkel is not fit to hold the office due to her health conditions. So let's keep an eye on this one as well. Now, of course, last night was the first of many upcoming Democratic debates, and I considered live streaming it, but I wanted to see what President Trump was going to do, and luckily I didn't, because he only had a couple of things to say. First of all, he dropped a tweet from Air Force One, and all he said was boring. Flying high over the Pacific on Air Force One, headed to Osaka, Japan for the G20 summit, President Trump tweeted a one-word slam of the first round of the Democratic presidential debates taking place in Miami. Boring. Earlier Wednesday, Trump told reporters he would be watching the debate. Everyone said, "I'll be tweeting. I'll actually be on the plane. It just seems very boring, but I'm going to watch it because I have to. This is part of my life," he said. Do I want to watch it? It's a very unexciting group of people. Later, at a stopover in Alaska, Trump greeted airmen with a dig at the debating Democrats. President Trump walks out on Dem debate, steps off Air Force One during refueling stop in Alaska, even though debate underway, to greet military personnel at Elmendorf Richardson. "I choose you over them," he said. "You're smarter." Oh, you gotta love it. Trump also said the candidates in the debate would do poorly. President Trump, he's got people who can watch the debate. It wasn't like there was much there. Arguably, the winner of that presidential debate was President Trump, in my mind. I tried watching a few minutes of it. People seemed a bit disorganized. They were eager to step over the words of the other people on the stage. It was a lot of SJW virtue signaling. Not a lot of real policy coming out of that debate, and it's clear that they are all weak candidates. And on the note of these Democrats being weak candidates, well, Beto got heckled after the Dem debate. Someone yelled out, "Beto, you're a shill!" Bobby Beto O'Rourke was heckled Wednesday night after the clown show Dem debate. Beto pandered to the illegal alien community and rattled off in Spanish when answering one of the debate questions, also known as hispandering. That's great. Beto got heckled after the debate. "Beto, you're a shill." Let's take a listen.
"Beto, you're a shill. Beto, you're a shill. Beto, you're a shill. Beto, you're a shill."
Yes, you are, Robert Beto O'Rourke. The Democrat debate Wednesday evening was a total clown show. Technical glitches and audio problems plagued the debate. On top of the mic problems, it turns out TV screens across the nation went to black multiple times for several seconds at a time during the debate broadcast. Yes, it is a clown show. It is a shill show. These Democrats have nothing on President Trump. They don't have policy. They don't have answers. They don't have the patriotism or the care for the American people. No one's going to defeat Trump in 2020. None of these people are strong enough to defeat President Trump, and they certainly do not have the support of any of the voters. Each of these politicians that are going against one another, they only have a small margin of each of these Democratic sectors in the Democratic base. And it's like they're all racing to the bottom. They all want to be the worst possible candidate. They are basically all communists at this point, verging on socialism openly. And it's people like AOC that is causing this rift in the Democratic Party to happen. Also, we have some news on what happened with AOC yesterday. Well, you may have seen these photos of AOC sobbing yesterday at what was purported to be a migrant detention camp. But new photos reveal that Occasional Cortex was not sobbing at the sight of caged migrant children. She was sobbing in an empty parking lot for a photo op. And photos released on Tuesday of Democrat Socialist Leader Representative Alexandria Occasional Cortex sobbing at a border entrance gate. The horror of the experience moved her to tears. It was suggested that AOC was sobbing presumably at the sight of migrant children being inhumanely detained, but the sobbing Occasional Cortex was holding her hands over her face to hide the pain. And she posted these sad photos to her Twitter page. She said, I'll never forget this because it was the moment I saw with my own eyes that the America I love was becoming a nation that steals refugee children from their parents and caged them. More kids died after this. To date, no one has been held accountable. We need to save the kids. And here she is. Look at her face. Oh, she's so pensive. Just can't handle the horror that she's seeing before her. However, new photos show that Occasional Cortex was crying in an empty parking lot. It was all staged. Here's another shot from the empty parking lot. Look, all you have to do is go to the other side of the fence and you can see it's clearly just an empty parking lot. Oh my, Occasional Cortex. Take a look. She's sobbing at the sight of this Ford Explorer. The horror, Occasional Cortex. She's such a fake. She's such a gigantic fake, and all she's doing is looking for a photo opportunity, looking for a new photo for her upcoming flyer for her re-election campaign. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. These people have absolutely no moral fiber. They are completely willing to lie, to fabricate, and to stage photo ops like this so that they can use it to tug at the heartstrings of lower IQ Americans. Also, Sean Hannity the other night was talking about the D-Class of Something Big, and newly released documents show that Samantha Power was spewing anti-Trump bias in government emails, while at the same time unmasking Americans like General Michael Flynn. The American Center for Law and Justice on Wednesday unearthed more evidence of significant political bias by senior Obama official Samantha Power during the same time she was unmasking American citizens. The Gateway Pundit reported last year that the ACLJ received heavily redacted emails from former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, that show unprecedented unmasking and political bias in the final days of Barry's administration. According to the ACLJ, these documents show Samantha Power, who made over 260 unmasking requests to spy on the incoming administration, was also colluding with the mainstream media, blatantly insulting President-elect Trump, and actively sought ways to undermine the incoming administration. Sekulow and his team fought for more documents and received another tranche of records through a FOIA lawsuit. I am discouraged and frightened. Electing a right-wing president is something, but such a morally repugnant bully, read a November 14, 2016 email to Samantha Power from an individual whose name was redacted for privacy reasons. The email referred to former Trump advisor Steve Bannon as an avowed racist and asserted the worst is coming. In December 2016, an email to Ben Rhodes, who was also implicated in the unmasking requests, Powers forwards an article entitled "Applied Pressure. Donald Trump isn't even president yet, and he's already making waves at the UN." Power asserted this reflects the lack of understanding of history. In response to a Reuters article entitled "Trump Looking at Fast Ways to Quit Global Climate Deal," source, Power forwarded the email to Jonathan Feiner, Director of Policy Planning at the DOS, with the message, "Lord, help us all. How are you holding up?" In a late November 2016 email in response to a diplomatic problem with Japan, Power complained to a colleague, "It is unreal how the Trump dynamic has changed things." The sheer political panic evidenced in Samantha Power's email shows that the fix was in against the incoming administration even before the 45th president was sworn into office, said Sekulow. In response to these newly unearthed emails, Congressman Mark Meadows said on Wednesday that he wants to bring Samantha Power in for questioning for possibly violating the Hatch Act. And here's what is troubling, Mr. Chairman. We have one standard for Kellyanne Conway and another standard for everybody else, so if you're going to subpoena people, let's subpoena Samantha Power, he said. Let's make sure she comes in because you know what I have? I have emails on her official account where she was going after Donald Trump while she was working for our government and indeed at the same time was unmasking individuals. In other notable emails uncovered last year by the ACLJ, Samantha Power was caught coordinating with left-wing media outlets in an effort to undermine the Trump transition team. Samantha Power still has not given a compelling answer as to why hundreds of Americans were unmasked in her name. Samantha Power has a lot to answer for. Samantha Power was one of the leading voices in the obstruction of President Trump and his incoming administration. And until she comes before Congress and answers these questions satisfactorily, I don't think that we're really going to have any closure on this. But Mark Meadows, I do trust him. I trust that he will get her before these committees and we will get answers from her. She may give Fifth Amendment answers to every single question, and that's fine. It just shows that she has something to hide. It's patently obvious. I mean, we don't even have to speculate on that. Obviously, Samantha Power was trying to undermine the government while she was working for the government. So let's get her before Congress, and then let's get some charges going, because Samantha Power was actually in violation of the Hatch Act, unlike the innocent Kellyanne Conway. Now, I said at the beginning of the program that Donald is in trouble. Radical activist Carlos Maza and junk website Media Matters are behind the movement to ban the Donald on Reddit. And not a surprise, earlier today, that was yesterday, Reddit quarantined the largest pro-Trump forum online just as election season begins. The Masters of the Universe censorship expands. Reddit just quarantined the Donald on Reddit. Reddit will not allow clever memes and pro-Trump discussion. Not on their platform. Not now. Not ever. The Donald's Reddit page tweeted this out on Wednesday morning. Look, this is the message you get when you try to join. Are you sure you want to view this community? This community is quarantined. It is restricted due to significant issues with reporting and addressing violations of the Reddit content policy. Most recently, the violations have included threats of violence against police and public officials. As a visitor or member, you can help moderators maintain this community by reporting and downvoting rule-breaking content. Are you certain you want to continue? Lies. All lies. I'm sure that they are getting reports from this community, but that's because you have people like Carlos Maza and Media Matters staging activism against it. They have people going in droves, I would no doubt, just to report many, many posts and try to downvote as much stuff as they possibly can. But we all know that the Donald Reddit page is one of the most popular pages on Reddit. Now we know who was behind this latest fascist effort to silence those you disagree with. It is the radical left-wing activist Carlos Maza and Soros-funded Media Matters. Maza is the same far-left activist and Vox reporter who led the campaign to demonetize conservative Steven Crowder on YouTube. Carlos Maza posted this Media Matters article on Twitter on Monday. It says here, Reddit claims to have an explicit policy against calls to violence. It's shut down subreddits before, so why hasn't it done anything about the Donald, the largest pro-Trump subreddit, which is littered with calls to violence? I don't believe that to be true at all. I have never seen calls to violence on the Donald, and I have lots of friends who post there. I have a friend who is a moderator there. I never have seen any of this stuff take place. This is clearly an organized effort to shut down conservative voices. And in today's world, it's not a surprise. But the only thing that I am surprised about is that it is beginning to gain some media traction. Finally, the story about the censorship of Project Veritas broke through in the last couple of days. But even then, it was only in the frame of Donald Trump talking about it. The mainstream media will not touch anything having to do with this because they know that they are behind the censorship themselves. If they report on it from YouTube, Google, Project Veritas, they're going to have to be reporting on it in regards to the way that they do it themselves. So they can talk about it when it's framed as a debate of, is President Trump talking about things in the correct way? Should he even be mentioning this? Well, yes, clearly he should be mentioning it, and clearly the rest of the media needs to be talking about it as well, because we are living in the nightmare scenario put forth by George Orwell in 1984. And the closer we get to the 2020 election, guys, the worse it's going to be. Now, speaking of Project Veritas, Vimeo has now banned James O'Keefe and Project Veritas's channel over perceived hateful content. And that hateful content was exposing the leftists at Google. Vimeo is the latest tech company to ban conservative content. What was once a safe bastion for conservatives is now just as intolerant as the rest. And Vimeo banned Project Veritas's channel on Wednesday. Here's the letter. Your account has been removed by the Vimeo staff for violating our guidelines. Reason, you cannot upload videos that are hateful, defamatory, or discriminatory. Incredible. Considered to be the more professional filmmaker alternative to YouTube, Vimeo has now jumped on the tech tyrant bandwagon and is removing conservative content, citing that it's hateful, defamatory, or discriminatory, or at least that's the message they sent to James O'Keefe after taking down the Project Veritas account on their site. Though one has to ponder what can possibly be hateful, defamatory, or discriminatory about a person's own words being broadcast to the world, unless it's the subjects of the videos who are saying hateful, defamatory, or discriminatory things. Or maybe Carlos Maza cried about it, and that's what influenced Vimeo's decision. This comes on the heels of YouTube removing Project Veritas videos involving the Google election manipulation scandal and Twitter locking the Project Veritas account, as well as numerous other instances of big tech companies banning and removing conservative and pro-Trump content. And, it's interesting. I just did an interview with SGT Report. I can't wait to see that come out. But we talked about this very thing. And we talked about the fact that I had someone from Twitter come to me and tell me that there was a list of accounts such as myself, Project Veritas, and others, accounts that were scheduled for deletion and scheduled for censorship, and that list was maintained and curated by all of these tech giants. So Vimeo would be on that list, YouTube would be on that list, Google, Facebook, Twitter, all of the big ones. They are looking for any reason possible to delete content such as Project Veritas's and to censor channels such as mine. I've really come to the realization that there is no safe place in the social media world for conservatives. Now Parler, I hear, is looking to be deleted from the Apple App Store because they want them to censor conservative voices there as well, and they're refusing to do so. So what are we going to do? I don't know. I don't know the answer, guys. All I can say is that I hope that President Trump and his administration does something to sort this out, because right now these tech companies are controlling the narrative, and it's making it very, very difficult to get this message out. It's getting harder and harder to be able to publish on any of these platforms. Sometimes it's very discouraging. There are days I wake up and I wonder if this channel is still even going to be there. But as long as it is, I'm going to continue to put this information out. All right, and finally, free press? Not likely. The New York Times admits that it sends stories to the U.S. government for approval before publication. And they casually acknowledge that it sends major scoops to the U.S. government before publication to make sure that national security officials have no concerns. The New York Times has publicly acknowledged that it sends some of its stories to the U.S. government for approval from national security officials before publication. This is something I've heard definitely in the past. This confirms what veteran New York Times correspondents like James Risen have said. The American newspaper of record regularly collaborates with the U.S. government, suppressing reporting the top officials don't want made public. On June 15th, the Times reported that the U.S. government is escalating its cyber attacks on Russia's power grid. According to the article, the Trump administration is using new authorities to deploy cyber tools more aggressively as part of a larger digital Cold War between Washington and Moscow. In response to that report, Donald Trump attacked the Times on Twitter, calling the article a virtual act of treason. The New York Times PR office replied to Trump from its official Twitter account, defending the story and noting that it had in fact been cleared with the U.S. government before being printed. Accusing the press of treason is dangerous, the Times communications team said. We described the article to the government before publication. As our story notes, President Trump's own national security officials said there were no concerns, the Times added. Indeed, the Times report on the escalating American cyber attacks against Russia is attributed to current and former U.S. government officials. The scoop, in fact, came from these apparatchiks, not from a leak or the dogged investigation of an intrepid reporter. Real journalists get approval from national security officials. The neoliberals' self-declared resistance jumped on Trump's reckless accusation of treason. The Democratic coalition, which boasts "we help run the resistance," responded by calling Trump Putin's puppet. The rest of the corporate media went wild. But what was entirely overlooked was the most revealing thing in the New York Times statement. The newspaper of record was essentially admitting that it has a symbiotic relationship with the U.S. government. In fact, some prominent American pundits have gone so far as to insist that this symbiotic relationship is precisely what makes someone a journalist. In May, neoconservative Washington Post columnist Mark Thiessen, a former speechwriter for President George W. Bush, declared that WL publisher and political prisoner J.A. is not a journalist, rather he is a spy who deserves prison. Thiessen also once called Assange the devil. What was the Post columnist's rationale for revoking Assange's journalistic credentials? Unlike reputable news organizations, J.A. did not give the U.S. government an opportunity to review the classified information that his organization, WL, was planning to release so they could raise national security objections, Thiessen wrote. So, responsible journalists have nothing to fear. In other words, this former U.S. government speechwriter turned corporate media pundit insists that collaborating with the government and censoring your reporting to protect so-called national security is the definition of what makes you a journalist. This is the express ideology of the American commentariat. The symbiotic relationship between the U.S. corporate media and the government has been known for some time. American intelligence agencies play the press like a musical instrument, using it to selectively leak information at opportune moments to push U.S. soft power and advance Washington's interests. But rarely is this symbiotic relationship so casually and publicly acknowledged. In 2018, former New York Times reporter James Risen published a 15,000-word article in The Intercept providing further insight into how this unspoken alliance operates. Risen detailed how his editors had been quite willing to cooperate with the government. In fact, a top C_A official even told Risen that his rule of thumb for approving a covert operation was, "How will this look on the front page of the New York Times?" There is an informal arrangement between the state and the press, Risen explained, where U.S. government officials regularly engaged in quiet negotiations with the press to try to stop the publication of sensitive national security stories. At the time, I usually went along with these negotiations, the former New York Times reporter said. He recalled an example of a story he was writing on Afghanistan just prior to the attacks in September back in 2001. Then, Clown director George Tenet called Risen personally and asked him to kill the story. He told me the disclosure would threaten the safety of the C_A officers in Afghanistan, Risen said. I agreed. Risen said he later questioned whether or not this was the right decision. If I had reported this story before that day in September, the clowns would have been angry, but it might have led to a public debate about whether the United States was doing enough to capture or kill OBL, he wrote. That public debate might have forced the clowns to take the effort to get bin Laden more seriously. This dilemma led Risen to reconsider responding to U.S. government requests to censor stories, and that ultimately set me on a collision course with the editors at the New York Times, he said. After those attacks in September, the Bush administration began asking the press to kill stories more frequently, Risen continued. They did it so often that I became convinced the administration was invoking national security to quash stories that were merely politically embarrassing. In the lead-up to the Iraq War, Risen frequently clashed with Times editors because he raised questions about the U.S. government's lies. But his stories raising questions about the intelligence, particularly the administration's claims of a link between Iraq and AQ, were being cut, buried, or held out of the paper altogether. The Times executive editor Howell Raines was believed by many at the paper to prefer stories that supported the case for war, Risen said. In another anecdote, the former Times journalist recalled a scoop he had uncovered on a botched clown plot. The Bush administration got wind of it and called him to the White House, where then National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice ordered the Times to bury the story. Risen said Rice told him to forget about the story, destroy my notes, and never make another phone call to discuss the matter with anyone. The Bush administration was successfully convincing the press to hold or kill national security stories, Risen said. And then the Barry Obama administration consequently accelerated the war on the press. In their renowned study of U.S. media, Manufacturing Consent, the Political Economy of the Mass Media, Edward S. Herman and Chomsky articulated a propaganda model showing how the media serve and propagandize on behalf of the powerful societal interests that control and finance them, through the selection of right-thinking personnel and by the editors and working journalists' internalization of priorities and definitions of newsworthiness that conform to the institution's policy. But in some cases, the relationship between U.S. intelligence agencies and the corporate media is not just one of mere ideological policing, indirect pressure, or friendship, but rather one of employment. In the 1950s, the clowns launched a covert operation called Project Mockingbird, in which it surveilled, influenced, and manipulated American journalists and media coverage explicitly in order to direct public opinion against the Soviet Union, China, and the growing international communist movement. Legendary journalist Carl Bernstein, a former Washington Post reporter who helped uncover the Watergate scandal, published a major cover story for Rolling Stone in 1997 titled "The Clowns and the Media: How America's Most Powerful News Media Worked Hand in Glove with the Clowns in America and Why the Church Committee Covered It Up." Bernstein obtained clown documents that revealed that more than 400 American journalists in the previous 25 years had secretly carried out assignments for the clowns in America. So that is basically the point that I wanted to get to. The Mockingbird media is called the Mockingbird media because of Project Mockingbird. They work hand in glove with the clowns in America, and they have been doing it for decades. And now it has flipped the script. Socialism and communism is the preferred ideology, and that is the stuff that is being reported on. We have turned the corner in America today, where once we used to fight communism, now we are actively supporting it. And now the clowns in America are working to subvert the actions and the administration of our current president, President Donald Trump. They no longer only want to make sure that they don't look bad, but they want to make sure that they control the total political narrative. This is a very, very scary time, folks, and the censorship that we see goes hand in glove with the clowns in America and the things that they want to be published. They can't allow for voices like myself, SGT Report, Aaron Moffat, or others in this movement to get to the forefront. And that's why we are seeing the censorship that we see today. It is very, very scary, and I really hope that President Trump is paying attention in the correct way and that his advisors are also taking note of the stuff that we are seeing. This was an act of virtual treason, not only because the clowns in America were okay with them publishing this information, because it was an act to undermine President Trump and to keep him out of the loop. All right, folks, that's all I have for you today. I want to thank everyone for joining me. As always, this has been Red Pill 78. I am the Corruption Detector, and this was your Red Pill News. Good luck, everyone, and God bless.